the start of 2021, WandaVision dominated the Marvel fandom as it periodically came out on Disney+. And after finally watching it for the first time, I can say that I really liked it. Yeah, I know I'm a bit late to the party, but I knocked out that entire thing in one day and had a lot of fun doing it. But there was always this one nagging feeling. A feeling that something was off with the show. A feeling that really picked up at the end of episode 7. And it's a feeling that really leaves a sour taste in my mouth. Hey guys, my name is DJ, and WandaVision, for the most part, was actually pretty interesting. There was a pretty cool and unique sitcom aesthetic to each episode. There were some lovely moments between Vision and Wanda, and there was definitely an interesting story to be told about grief. But in the back of my mind, as I stated previously, there was always something a bit off with the show. And I know, the show is sort of designed to feel like something is off, but it was never really an unsatisfying feeling in an intended way. While there was this emotional centerpiece to WandaVision with the obvious mental collapse of Wanda, there was still something wrong. Something felt like it was being held back. And then the big twist with Agatha happens as she becomes the main villain, and I finally realized what exactly was being held back. You see, the true main problem with this entire show is that it still has to be a superhero show. Sure, the entire series is starring a Marvel character, and thus you would expect it to be a show that features your typical good guy versus bad guy fights, but for the most part, the show doesn't feel like that's what it's trying to be. For me, this shouldn't be one of those typical superhero shows with that good guy versus bad guy template. Shows like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Daredevil, etc. No, instead, the show is trying so hard to be framed around Wanda's grief for Vision, but then it ultimately has to have a main villain. So they decided to bring in Agatha. Now, personally, I think Agatha was incredibly interesting. Her powers, her origin story, her amazing song, "It's been Agatha all along," and her assistance in explaining more about Wanda is really interesting. She has a unique backstory, and that backstory is used to complement Wanda's powers. Seriously, please don't take this video as me hating on Agatha as a character. For the first 2/3 of the season, Agatha was one of the most interesting aspects of the entire show. And, in case it really needs to be said, Kathryn Hahn absolutely steals the show in terms of her incredible performance. But the problem here is that Agatha is just so unnecessary for this story. Sure, Agatha could be an interesting villain in any Wanda story, but she doesn't necessarily need to be in this story. And look, I understand the idea of a hero having to battle their internal struggles while they have to deal with a dangerous foe. Hell, that's probably why people love Spider-Man 2 so much. But the problem here is that Wanda is already dealing with so much stuff that is directly related to her emotional state right now. Wanda has to deal with the soldiers that are trying to save the Westview civilians. Wanda's internal struggle with her taking an entire town hostage. Wanda finding out more about the magnitude of her powers, her complete emptiness now that she has nobody left in her life, and, of course, her intense grief for Vision following Infinity War. That is a lot to deal with right there. And all those little plot threads are connected to the main central plot of Wanda grieving over Vision. I mean, the title of the show is literally just Wanda and Vision put together. Clearly, their relationship should be the main focus of the series. However, when looking at Agatha as a character, when looking at her motivations and her connection to Wanda in this story, you can tell how almost last minute she feels. She just feels disconnected, and it's weird. Instead of just giving us a heartbreaking and emotional tale about Vision's death, they just decided to kind of shoo in a superhero story. Now, Typically, I believe the hero versus villain story works well for superhero shows and movies. Hell, it's basically expected at this point. But WandaVision was the perfect opportunity to break away from that mold. The reason why people love Infinity War so much is that it goes out of its way to break the mold of a superhero story. In Infinity War, Thanos beats the Avengers. He actually accomplishes his mission and goes on to succeed. This ending, where the Avengers all get dusted away, is exactly what the MCU needed. It needed something different. Sure, it's still the classic hero versus villain story, but that ending is what makes it the most unique MCU movie of all time. Because it was different. Because, for the first time ever, the villain actually won. And in my opinion, WandaVision was so close to being another example of the MCU breaking out of its own mold. And honestly, the true conflict should have just been Wanda's internal struggle to deal with her own mental state. In my opinion, the Joker movie proved to everyone that the big screen is ready for Marvel and DC characters to be conduits for stories that don't revolve around the bad guy versus good guy template. We are ready to see how these characters truly feel, and WandaVision could have been perfect for that. But no. Instead, Marvel decided to throw in that unneeded and disappointing hero versus villain story. A story that doesn't contribute to anything significant in the show. Sure, you could say that Agatha was helping Wanda's whole warped reality finally collapse, but that almost feels a bit retroactive. For the first few episodes, these little odd interruptions in Wanda's warped reality sort of felt like Wanda finally going through these little moments of grief. And if you actually look at it in that way, Wanda has one of the most interesting character arcs in any MCU series through these little grief moments. She starts the series off in pain, so much so that she decides to create her own world by taking an entire town hostage and essentially using them as slaves, which is one of the most fucked up things anyone has ever done in the MCU. However, through these little moments where her fantasy breaks, you can make a case for her finally starting to grieve as she comes to terms with her true reality. It's such a unique and interesting display of character growth that is ultimately just stripped away with the inclusion of Agatha. Because instead of Wanda's fantasy world just completely collapsing due to her own internal growth, it can all just be explained away through Agatha. All of this juicy character development is all just sort of hollowed out. Wanda's subtle moments of clarity turn into moments that Agatha can be blamed for. Like I said, you can have Agatha as a villain for Wanda. I am 100% on board with that. But to have Wanda's character development almost be put completely onto Agatha's villainous scheme, well, then it kind of makes the entire emotional impact of the series feel so much more watered down. The true grief of Vision is rushed in at the end, as opposed to feeling like something Wanda has been properly processing the entire time. Wanda is never fully punished for her enslavement of Westview because she has to look like a hero to take on Agatha. And a story that could have been incredibly emotional and self-reflective is held back as the show goes back to the same old story template. Instead of it feeling specifically about the internal struggle of Wanda's mental collapse, it is instead forced to stand aside that unneeded hero and villain story. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I know that I'm a little late to the party when it comes to making a video about WandaVision, but I want to know what you think about my thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And until next time, have a good day. Bye-bye.